Housing Policy Committee on Wednesday, 2nd of July 2025, from the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is 6:30 p.m. My name is Councillor Batho, Chairperson of the committee. Some housekeeping points before we start. This meeting is recorded, live streamed, and will be available on the Council YouTube channel. Can everyone please ensure mobile phones are on silent? In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. Welcome everyone to the meeting. I would just like to advise that there are a small adjustment to the running orders for tonight, and we would like to swap items 7 and 8, so that our first substantial item for discussion will be the Social Housing Regulation Consumer Standard Improvement Plan. So, turning to the agenda. Item 1, apologies and deputy members. Nancy, is there any?
I don't believe there's any apologies for the committee, but I didn't know whether you wanted to note that Councillor Reach, as cabinet member, is not able to be here, and I believe we have Councillor Cutler standing in for him.
Thank you, Nancy. And then on to item 2, any declarations of interest? Are there any that members would like to give? Thank you. And then on to item 3, the appointment of a vice chairperson for the 2025-26 municipal year. As this is the first meeting of the committee, it's necessary to appoint a vice chairperson. So I'd like to call for nominations for the role of vice chair, please.
I would like to nominate Councillor Chamberlain, please.
Thank you. Any other nominations? Can I have a second for Councillor Chamberlain, please?
Yeah, happy to second Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Could I please have a show of hands for Councillor Chamberlain? Please. Thank you, Councillor Chamberlain. If you'd like to join me at the table, thank you. So there are no announcements under item 4 for chairperson's announcements. So we'll move on to item 5, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. The minutes are from the meeting held on the 11th of February 2025, which are on pages 5 to 12 of the agenda pack. Can I ask if there's any questions about the minutes? If not, we'll move on to agreement of those. No? Okay. So can I ask for agreement then on those minutes, please? Great. Thank you. Okay, so item 6 is public participation. Mr. Tate, you've nominated so I believe you're going to be talking on the Social Housing Regulation Consumer Standards. Is that the item you want to talk about?
Chair, I did contact the committee officer earlier today to say, because I've got a school governors meeting, I'm not going to be able to wait until that item comes up, but I have got something relevant to the committee which I do want to raise, but I'd rather like to raise it under item 6, public participation, and regrettably, once I've spoken, I'm going to hot foot it off to a school governor meeting. Not that I don't want to stay, but I have another commitment.
Okay, thank you. You have 3 minutes. Okay, 3 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Tate.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to address this committee. I wish to raise the issue of what the council's policy is on ring doorbells and similar devices in communal areas. I have been approached by a council tenant, as has the MP, living in a council-owned block of flats. Their neighbour has installed a ring doorbell which is able to record both sound and vision, when the camera is triggered by movement in close proximity to the camera sensor. This particular camera has been attached to the wall, not their front door, in the communal area, and is angled such that its field of view reaches into the neighbour's flat if their own door is open. It appears that someone standing in front of the neighbour's door can actually activate the camera even though the party hasn't approached the Ring doorbell on the designated door. The council tenant has recently installed their own sensor triggered camera without sound recording. It's on a communal wall facing away from the neighbour's property and covering anyone who approaches that tenant's own door with the appropriate CCTV warning notice. I'm reasonably conversant with the national regulations concerning CCTV cameras, but it isn't entirely clear what the council's own policy is, or if there is a policy. I've carefully read through the Tenant Handbook 2024, but doesn't make reference to Ring doorbells. All I can establish is that Winchester City Council tenants generally need permission to install a Ring doorbell due to the potential privacy concerns regarding communal areas and public spaces. While most requests for Ring doorbells are denied, exceptional circumstances may be considered. If granted, tenants must ensure the device doesn't capture images of shared areas and installation must not compromise fire safety. I'm intrigued by this, as across the city there are quite a few Ring doorbells in council-owned blocks of flats. Looked at many of them recently. So are they all exceptions to the rule? Also, if permission for a Ring doorbell is given by the council, will the council advise other tenants of that block that permission has been granted? What are those exceptional circumstances, and what's the difference between a standalone camera and a Ring doorbell? I've checked with Southampton City Council and they have a much clearer explanation of what should be done. So my question to the committee is whether you feel that there should be a policy. If I'm right, there isn't one. And are the procedures fit for purpose? And this is a very sensitive issue, as I'm finding out, and it may be escalated to the strategic director by tomorrow. Due to complaints. So I think actually there's a lot more to CCTV cameras than possibly meets the eye, Chair, and I hope it falls within the remit potentially of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. I just obviously it's not always able to respond to questions that are raised at public participation, but initial conversation with Ms. Hendy indicated this might have been the line of questioning, that there is a possibility of a brief response to that. And we'll actually then just ask Mr. Hendy and other officers to respond to that briefly. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We have looked into this, and there's an aspect of clause 44 of the tenancy agreement says a tenant must not, without the landlord's prior consent, install any object on the exterior of the property or any part of the internal communal area. So if a CCTV camera has been installed without our consent, we will be asking for that to be removed. Appreciate that's a different situation with Ring doorbells, but we'll look at that on a case-by-case basis. Don't know, Yvonne, if you've got anything to add to that?
Thank you. So this is something that we've been reviewing under our antisocial behaviour policy, just to understand the implications of CCTV and Ring doorbells, and we are reviewing our policies to make amendments to that so that CCTV and doorbells and Ring doorbells aren't included as a neighbour nuisance matter. We don't think that's appropriate following advice from a third party that's been working with us. So we're looking to do that, and we're trying to develop a much more pragmatic approach to Ring doorbells, whereas where CCTV is installed without permission, then that is something we would follow up under the tenancy agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. Hopefully that gives an initial response to you, Mr. Tate, and obviously as a committee we'll then look at whether there's a need to review the policy and bring that back to this committee as well. So thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so if we now can move on to item 7, which was item 8. It's the Social Housing Regulation Consumer Standard Improvement Plan. This is on pages 25 to 42 of the agenda report pack. And the recommendation we have is it's recommended that the Policy Committee comment on the proposals within the attached Cabinet report, reference CAB 3511H, which has been considered by Cabinet Committee Housing at its meeting on the 23rd of July 2025. So I'd like to hand over to Councillor Cutler, standing in for Councillor Reach, to give a brief introduction, and then handing over to Mr. Hendy and to Yvonne Anderson. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. In February 24th, Cabcom Housing received a report on the new consumer standards that were to come into force in April 24. And at that committee meeting, the Housing Service was asked to undertake a self-assessment against those standards. Local authorities hadn't been subject to assessment before that point. And following the internal self-assessment, we had an external independent self-assessment that was commissioned, which identified long-term issues which would jeopardise the council's ability to meet the safety and quality standards. In February 25, Cabcom Housing received a report on the self-assessment and was informed that a self-referral had been made to the social housing regulator. The intention of the self-referral was to engage with the regulator and begin work to achieve the consumer standards for the council's housing tenants as soon as possible. Following engagement with the regulator, they made a regulatory judgment on the 30th of April of C3, which is serious failings and improvement needed for safety and quality and transparency, influence and accountability. The judgment was not unexpected given the self-assessment. All tenants were written to explain what that meant and to reassure them. And I should stress that we had been working, and the council had been working since the initial self-referral on an action plan. And so the position on the 30th of April was not the same as the position on the 1st of in January when the referral was made. So the detailed improvement plan has been developed and shared with the regulator. That's shown at Appendix A of the paper. There are regular monthly meetings with the regulator to demonstrate progress. Appendix B shows the progress in achieving compliance with the health and safety requirements. The intention is that the report will be made to each Cabcom Housing, and that safety key performance indicators are now part of the corporate quarterly performance monitoring report, which goes to scrutiny. Work with the regulator will be ongoing and is expected to take about 18 months, after which the service could be subject to an inspection, something that would have happened by 2028 anyway. So we'd like to invite the committee to provide comments for the Cabcom Housing Committee that will take place later this month. I'm not an expert on this, but Simon and Yvonne are both here to take your questions.
Thank you, Councillor Cutler. Just in terms of questions, are there any general questions, or before we actually move into the actual report itself? So are there any general questions about the position we're in, and we'll then actually look at the report itself? Okay, Councillor Murphy.
Yes, just a brief one before we wade in. So you talked about a letter having been communicated to residents. Do you have any, what was the feedback from that? How was that received by residents?
I'll leave that for Mr. Hendy to
answer that, Chair. There were 14 responses from the 5,100 letters that were sent out, and of those, some were actually not related to the regulatory judgment. Some of those are actually reminded people that they hadn't contacted us for some repairs that are outstanding. So some of the responses out of the 14. So hopefully we were able to reassure them.
My apologies, Ms. Hendy. Have you got more of an introduction to before we go into those questions? My apologies. Okay, great. So if there's any further questions, Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. This is really sort of a general question about the structure of the report and how how our agreement works with the regulator, insofar as was it agreed with the regulator that certain things had a greater priority than others? And if so, in the actual report where we get the date followed by a revised target date and then the status, is it that the regulator agreed certain dates in terms of time frame for delivery of important things, and then their expectation is to that date, or does this develop with them over those monthly meetings, and do we get sort of the revised date agreed and then on track is onto the revised date, one assumes, rather than, so do you see what I mean? I want to sort of understand if the dialogue and the agreement with the regulator is in line with sort of what we're seeing here and the priorities they're in agreement with. Thank you.
Sorry, yes, Mr. Hendy, sorry.
So the timescales and the milestone dates in the action plan are based on the independent assessment that was undertaken before we made the self-referral, and we shared that with the regulator. The regulator were comfortable with the priorities, so the timescales for each of those actions relates to the priority. As soon as something has to be done, higher priority. Push further into the future, lesser priority. So the regulator's comfortable with those timescales. You'll see there's been some minor slippage on some things. We share that with the regulator on a regular basis. To date, they've not shown any concern in terms of the changes, those minor changes to some of those dates.
Great, thanks very much.
Councillor
Well, I
White.
think one of the, sorry, could I just add?
Yeah, sorry, Councillor.
As a general point, I think in discussion the other day with Mr. Hendy, it's very clear that also the regulator have specific case officers to this. It's not going to change. They're going to be the same people we're dealing with through that, the regulator, because there was some concern expressed by cabinet that you know, if you were dealing with multiple people, they changed. That you know, different people have different views. So that's pretty important fact to get across, I think.
White.
It's a similar question along the lines of how the priorities came about. So I note on page 33 it mentions a tier 1 project for the compliance work. So does that mean that the compliance work was prioritised above? I mean, there's an awful lot of different work streams involved in the plan. I was just wondering if the compliance work was prioritised due to safety and things.
Thank you.
The tier 1 project is referring to the council's project management methodology. So that's all tier 1 projects are reported via the quarterly performance monitoring report that goes to scrutiny and cabinet. So this has now become part of that. And as Councillor Cutler said, alongside that are the safety indicators, the KPIs, and that reflects the importance of the compliance activity. Clearly, we need to make sure tenants' homes are safe. So that's around the 6 compliance areas of gas, electricity, lifts, water, got me out of one, asbestos, and there's one other one, fire, crumbs, how could I forget fire, yes.
Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. The report kind of makes clear that under the financial implications that sort of budgetary considerations that sit alongside the compliance improvement plan, but then later in the report which sort of touches on, if I understand the report correctly, there's a challenge from a staffing perspective for the City Council in terms of being able to resource that, and indeed contract resource may need to be looked at. In my experience, contract resource then comes with kind of a premium on price, and therefore the question is whether that's reflected in the budget provisions that have been made.
Henry.
You're correct. When we employ agency staff, they do come with a premium. We've been successful in securing some agency staff, and we've also been successful, and still, if understands, are successful making some permanent employments. But at the moment, there's no additional pressure on the existing budgeting set aside for this.
Okay, so Councillor Morris.
Yeah, just looking at the loss of resource, ensuring the workload is appropriate for existing staff. Do you have an idea how much extra work this reform is actually adding to our officers' workload in terms of hours or cost, or indeed staff?
Yes, thank you, Councillor.
That's a difficult one to answer because obviously this is work that should have been done. So I need to sort of defer to Yvonne. I don't think we haven't increased the overall staff establishment to deal with this work. So even if we have agency staff, they're held against posts in the establishment. It might be costing more, but they're held against the overall structure. I'm not close to whether staff are actually involved in more hours to achieve this work. I don't know, Yvonne, if you can help out in that respect.
So I think for some particular staff around compliance, there has been some additional demand on those, but we're supporting them through that. And then now that we have got the building safety manager in post and a fire safety manager, we're starting to see that ease. So I think as we get colleagues into the establishment, we should see a difference there, and I'm confident that that will ease the burden on some colleagues. Thank you.
So I'm just going to follow up. So if we're taking on agency staff to deal with this, you said there has been an additional cost as a result of this. Is that correct?
Yeah, sorry.
Yes, it's been mentioned by Councillor Chamberlain. Agency staff come at a premium. We are not the only housing provider we regulated. Every housing provider in the country, registered providers, councils are all regulated. They all have to achieve these standards. So therefore, the staff that are capable of undertaking this work are at a premium, and they can call their price. And we're in the same situation as all other housing providers. In that respect, we've been successful in recruiting some permanent staff, but in some areas we've had to use agency staff, and they do cost a premium.
Question from myself is clearly there's outstanding work which we're having to catch up with in terms of the condition surveys and some of the other sort of work in terms of compliance. But the other aspect I think that the regulator was commenting on was actually process and procedures. What are we doing to update our process and procedures such that this information, which is now being gathered in terms of compliance, is actually being, you know, sort of put into the right format, and we as a council will then have processes once this, you know, catch-up exercise is completed to actually then make sure that we're going to maintain this ongoing into the future.
Thank you, Chair. So Appendix B here shows you the dashboard that's been generated recently. So you have all in one place all the compliance information. It shows trends in terms of how we are addressing achieving compliance and obtaining the information to give assurance of achieving compliance. We don't have a computer system that's capable of dealing that at the moment. We're in the process. I think we've just this week or it could be last week signed a contract with a nationally recognised compliance system that we'll use, that will integrate with our asset management system. So we are running to catch up with this without a doubt. There will be additional costs around that. And when we have new systems, our procedures will respect the way those systems work.
Thank you, Ms. Hendy. Councillor Bolton.
I had a question ancillary to that, actually, Simon, which was that is LGR going to get in the way of that? I know Councillor Cutler's mentioned a number of times that, you know, computer systems, the expense of that and the potential for change of authorities, it fills you with quite a dilemma, doesn't it, as to what to do?
Thank you, Ms. Hendy.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Wherever possible, we're looking at buying web-based systems, so that doesn't generate any additional demand in-house in terms of running those systems. And LGR in total shouldn't impact on the housing service because there's a housing revenue account that's separate from the general fund of the council, so it should be quite sacrosanct in that respect.
Councillor Cutler.
I mean, there will be ongoing work within the what was the TC25 programme, which is a broader transformation programme now, to ensure to be looking at work streams about when we get closer idea of where we may be going, to make sure that certain things are compatible. But it's less critical with housing revenue accounts simply because they can stand alone within any new authority. Even if there's another one, they can be two separate HRAs that can be gradually integrated over time rather than need, you know, on a big bang basis to be integrated because they are ring fence separate. It's easier to do it that way. So it's less critical that in terms of if we need systems, we will go ahead with it here. I think that's the important thing.
And just to say, I think your comment about it being web-based is right, because then you're just talking about data feed, aren't you, rather than, you know, compatibility of systems. And I think that's absolutely spot on. Yeah.
Councillor White.
So while we're on the subject of data, I had a question because it mentions in the report about how a lot of the data is held by the external contractors and you're beginning to port it over to internal systems. So I'm wondering where you are with that at the moment. Where is the data? Is it impeding your progress or sort of access to the data because it's held in other contractors' portals?
Sandy, thank you.
So that refers to some of the health and safety compliance data that we had that contractors held, and I think we have been able to transfer most of that back. The contractor that we will be using to do the stock condition information, they'll hold that data for us. We need to replace the asset management system, and that will be fed by the stock condition data system. So we have an agreement with them to hold that data because clearly we don't want them to import that into our old system and then have to change that to a new system. But we're very mindful of the fact now of making sure that we have good, clean data and data requirements of contractors. It's always going to be our data, so we can make sure it comes into our systems at the right time and the right quality.
Thank you. Yeah. Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. Just a specific question on Annex B. So it appears one of the main challenges seems to be in the electrical safety checks, particularly with the previous contractor going into liquidation. So there's clearly plans afoot to bring in a new contractor or resource there. Is that now in place, and then the catch-up's underway on the safety checks, the electrical safety checks we're behind on?
Sandy.
Thank you for your question. So for the electrical safety checks that are outstanding, we've actually got appointments for all of those customers. So those are all aligned and should be happening. And in terms of our electrical contractors, that's underway at the moment. So I can't give a definitive response on that yet, but it is underway. Thank you.
Councillor White.
So I just wondered about the stock condition survey. Obviously, you need to survey the whole stock from scratch, really. And it says in Appendix A that there's some minor slippage on the mobilisation of that. So everything's in place to do that survey, but it's not mobilised yet. I just wondered why that might be, and also what the timelines are. So when are you expecting that to start and finish?
Sorry, Yvonne, sorry.
Thank you. So we're expecting mobilisation this month. We did have some technical issues in terms of IT, unfortunately, but we've overcome that now. So we do expect it to start imminently. We've got a pilot for 6 months, and then we will continue with the rollout, and we expect it to be completed in 2 years. And then we've also supported the company, we've contracted to do that with 2 graduate surveyors as well that we've recruited into the team as a permanent resource, which will also grow and then support the stock condition process moving forwards as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a sort of, I suppose, a follow on from that. In terms of then a regular, which I assume there will need to be, a regular review of the stock condition of all of the housing. As we're going through this quite quickly, what process are we going to put in place to then set up that ongoing regular report? Because obviously you'll have had a large number done in a short period of time. So what's the process going to be to sort of then smooth that out? Because I assume we're not going to then continue at that rate, repeatedly. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So the intention is with our graduate surveyors that they will be the resource that we will use. The expectation is that we do stock condition surveys every 5 years. So those colleagues will be doing this work on a rolling programme. Thank you.
Okay, so yes, that will then sort of then spread over that 5-year period. So the 5,000 homes will be around about 1,000 per year, effectively. Okay, thank you. Councillor Murphy.
Just if you talk a bit about the actual checks themselves, and I suppose looking at it just the first time, or somebody coming in from the outside, as an outside looking in, you see a lot of checks needing to be done. I suppose if you could give some comfort or not on terms of how those checks are going, whether there's sort of an expected level of problems coming out of it, or any areas of concern, and just sort of basically what's the outturn of the checks that are being done. And then just in terms of, again, one that could potentially give people concern around asbestos, because obviously that can be a huge range of potential exposure, from harmless to very dangerous. What does it mean that there was effectively it's all in the non-compliance? What have we missed out on? And do you have any actual concerns around safety from that, or is this a process issue?
Sandy.
So thank you, Chair. Around electrical checks, there were some properties that hadn't had electrical checks for quite some time, talking years, and that's why the judgment was made by the regulator. So, as Yvonne's already said, we now have appointments with customers, because by and large, the reason for that was we couldn't get access to people's homes. Obviously, you can't do the check unless you get into people's homes. So this is a high priority. We're engaging the service across the piece, using our tenancy services colleagues to make contact with customers wherever they can to make sure we can access the properties. We never leave a property unsafe. So as long as we can get access, we can ensure it's going to be safe. Asbestos, I'm conscious there was some reports coming in from colleagues. Asbestos, we're up to date in terms of understanding the position of asbestos across the stock. But again, we'd fallen short in terms of some of the annual surveys of communal areas around asbestos. We hadn't been doing that, but we're now up to date with that. So as Councillor Cutler said earlier, the position we're in now is quite different to the position when we made the self-referral in January. We've made significant progress, but you're not judged where you are now, you're judged where you were.
Certainly, that's no ongoing concern on that.
Councillor White.
So I think Councillor Cutler said that you could be inspected within 18 months or something. So if you stick to this plan, would you expect that you would have an uplift in your grading if you were inspected?
Sandy.
So the regulator thinks they'll be working with us for 18 months to deal with the issues around safety and quality, consumer standard, transparency, and accountability standard. At the end of that 18-month period, they may carry out inspection across all the consumer standards, or they may actually push it off to later. As Councillor Cutler said, we were going to be inspected within a 4-year period from 24 anyway. You can't change the rating until you're inspected. So the rating will stay here until the inspection takes place.
Yeah, sorry, just a quick one on the asbestos in item 3. It says ensure there is sufficient funding and resource to complete actions deriving from asbestos surveys. I mean, that could be a real can of worms, could it not? Page 38.
Sorry, Councillor, could you just repeat the?
Yes, it's page 38, asbestos management, recommendation 20. Item 3 says ensure actions are completed within a reasonable time frame and there is sufficient funding and resource to complete actions deriving from asbestos surveys.
Thank you.
Yes, I mean, we have made provision in the Housing Revenue Account for the compliance activity. So there's significant additional budgets in there that were in last year, and some of that work hadn't been commissioned and completed last year, so we carried forward into this year. So at this point in time, we haven't come across anything that would cause us concern that would be over and above the existing budgets that have been allocated.
Councillor Morris.
Have you moved on to discussing the appendix now then? Because I've got questions about that. Are we on the appendix now?
Yes, if there are no more general questions, I think we'll move on to Appendix A. Thank you.
Okay, well, my first question with Appendix A is just when will we see the next version of it? Are we going to get updates of this every month or just the next committee meeting?
Thank you, sir.
We provide regular updates to the monthly meeting with the social housing regulator. It's our intention to report to Capcom Housing when they meet during the year.
But regarding members of this committee, when will we see the next version of it?
Simon?
Makes me in a difficult position. I can't speak on behalf of the Cabinet Member of Housing. That will be his responsibility to decide whether he wants to bring these action plans back to here or whether he wants to deal with them as his meeting of Cabinet Committee Housing.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of what's proportionate. If the work's ongoing, this committee is satisfied that the process is in place, then if the chair or members of committees see the report that goes to Capcom Housing and wants to scrutinise it again, they can ask. But we've got to be very careful that we don't end up putting standing agenda items that make the agenda very long of the committee. I mean, I think that's up down to the chair actually, and discussion with the committee. This is the initial process for you as a committee to look at this and see if you're happy with things. It goes to Capcom Housing. If it caused consternation for members of the committee when they saw the paper that's going to Capcom Housing, then I'm sure it could be requested to come back to this committee. But we don't. I don't think we should need to program in at this stage a regular discussion on it at the committee, but that's down to you as a committee. My personal recommendation would be don't.
Yes, my feeling is that as long as this committee is comfortable with the process that's been undertaken and that there aren't any areas that we think that should be added or sort of investigated further in terms of that process, that then is handed over. I know that the previous cabinet member was very keen to move things to Capcom Housing rather than actually sort of come constantly back through this committee. So as Councillor Cutler said, if we feel that there's a need for it to come back, we can at a later stage request it. So if members would like to do that, then please let me know, sort of subsequently. But I think in the main that the actual progress in meeting the regulations is then actually monitored both at Capcom Housing, but also, as Councillor Cutler mentioned, it will be going to scrutiny as well. So on a regular basis, as Simon said, there will be a report presented to scrutiny, and that review will then be held at that committee as well. So I think there are other committees which will be looking at this. If we feel we need to do in the future, we can then request it to come back, but I don't think it should be scheduled in as a matter of course. That's my sort of thoughts on that, given the information we've listened to. Thank you.
I'm satisfied if it's going to a committee, it's going to be scrutinising it. That's the point of the exercise. It doesn't have to be this committee. It just needs to be a committee.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. So in terms of Appendix A, were there any other questions around the recommendations that we're going through there in any of the various category areas? No? Okay. And then in terms of Appendix B, were there any specific questions? No, we have asked a few already, but were there any more specific questions around Appendix B and the actual compliance performance table that's represented in the report there? No?
Just if I could have some idea of what it's item communal blocks BSO2 fire safety checks, and it says there are 12 high risk actions open. And how should I, when you say high risk, I assume that's not a high risk of immediate it will catch fire, but it's a high risk in some other sort of form. Could you characterize what is meant by high risk in this situation?
Yvonne, would you be able to answer that, or thank you very much.
Thank you. So our fire risk assessors, for the work that they're doing, visit every block and they report back to us in terms of high, medium and low risks. And a high risk could be a mobility scooter in a communal area, for example. So there is a risk there potentially that that's actually not safe, and so we would work with the customer to address that. There could also be instances where there's refuse in a communal area, and actually again that could be a source of ignition, so we'd be taking action against that. Or it could be for example, there might be an issue that we need to address from a technical perspective as well, and then we would resource that to make sure we had contractors on site to address those things as a matter of urgency. Thank you.
That's Morris again.
Given things like the fire Grenfell, would you say these are all things which are fixable without major alterations to the buildings? The things you've described are things which are fixable due to the tenants changing their behaviour. Are there any which require major architectural redesigns on?
Thank you, Yvonne.
Thank you. So I think it's fair to say that there are, we are looking at fire doors and compartmentation, and so some aspects of that may well go through the planned programme. So it's either we can respond to it in our reactive plan with reactive responsive repairs, or we'll be making recommendations for it to go through the planned programme. And we do have some fire remediation works underway through that programme this year. Thank you.
Thank you. I've just got one question. In terms of the identification of this regulation, and then the fact that we were remiss in terms of actually sort of progressing with the checks, that sort of gap between government sort of policy and our own response. Are there any other areas of policy that are coming from the government which might sort of create a similar type of issue in terms of us? I mean, what are we doing to track government sort of thinking and actually ensuring that the council has a valid response to that? Thank you.
Thank you. So to respond to that, we're aware of Awaab's law legislation coming in October, and we're preparing our response to damp and mould. We've also recruited a building safety manager who will be giving us oversight of legislation as well, to making sure we're compliant. And then we also have our policy and projects team researching regularly about what's coming through. We're members of HQN as well, and so that's a professional body who support us in terms of us keeping up abreast of developments in the sector, and I think there's expertise on the floor as well. So I'm confident that actually there won't be a repeat as we keep ahead of the legislation and changes that come in the sector. It's been huge in terms of regulation legislation in recent years, and it continues to come, and we recognise that. Thank you.
Thank you. I was just wondering whether, for the committee's benefit, whether there might be an opportunity for a briefing at a subsequent meeting of the range of regulation that's coming through, so that the committee is actually aware of what, sort of there are for potential impacts on the council. And as Yvonne was saying, what is it that we're currently doing to sort of anticipate that. I think that would help the committee in terms of being then made aware of the types of things that would actually then potentially come through as policy as a result of responding to that government regulation. So if that's something I could ask for us to discuss, Simon, in terms of an agenda item for a future meeting. Thank you. So are there any other points of questions to be raised? If not, then can I ask any debate on this paper, please? Councillor Bolton.
Just one thing, my background is in a heavily regulated industry, and I think the approach that you've taken is absolutely spot on. It's far better to self-refer on these things and then work closely with the regulator, make them your new best friend. I think you've done the right thing, and I think your officers are to be commended for that. Thank you.
Yes, I'd just like to reflect, as Councillor Bolton has, that clearly it was an unenviable position that the council was in when this was uncovered, but I think the reaction to it has been very positive. And I think if we look at the way that then we've, as Councillor Bolton has said and was said in the introduction, we've actually made sure that we've identified that to the regulator. It helps with the transparency of the council, demonstrating that we are aware of the situation and that we're actually making ourselves open to then having response from the regulator at the earliest opportunity. That I think then helps us when we are in this situation. It may be that there's a lot of work still to be done, and there's clearly a lot of effort that we need to find funding for, and to make sure that we are tracking, and as Councillor Morris was saying, actually making sure that a committee is at least keeping an eye on what's actually going on. But I think the fact that we've actually got to this position is a reflection on the work from the officers, and I'd like to say thank you to yourselves, Simon and Yvonne, for to getting this to this point. And I can see from the work we've got that we've got a clear plan and a clear way of tracking that plan, so that we'll actually make sure that we actually do achieve a increase or better standard at the next point at which we are reviewed by the regulator. So thank you very much. Okay, so I think if we just finish up with that, the recommendation was that the committee note comment on the proposals with the attached Cabinet report, and which should be considered at the meeting, Council Capcom Housing at its meeting on the 23rd of July 2025. So I think we've done that. And I think in terms of follow-up, I think if we'd ask if we can confirm that the report will then be validated or responded to at Capcom Housing, and just get that confirmation from the cabinet member that that's the process by which this will be monitored. I'll just ask if we could minute that, Nancy, and also then for a paper or some report to be brought to this committee of future government regulations and how that might be impacting on the council, with a view from officers as to how that will be responded to by the council. So I think those are the two resolutions from this particular paper. So thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Cutler. Okay. We're just going to move on now to a review of the housing policy resolutions. This is something that was initiated last year which I'd asked for the officers to basically reflect or to comment on the papers that have come through this committee through last year. So it's an opportunity for members to really just reflect on things that we were asked to comment on, and for a review then of those points that are being made, so that this committee has an opportunity to make some just final questions or comments on those papers that were brought to the committee. Find the relevant pages on my thing. Okay, so we've gone back to September of last year, 17th September, where there was a paper on the Winchester District Economy Review. The team have given an update to the resolutions that we were asking to be responded to there. Are there any questions against that particular paper? We've got the comments on the right hand side in terms of updates, which were some of the responses at the time, but also subsequent responses. Councillor White.
So we have some numbers of how many people took up the retrofit skills or the digital skills or whatever. They seem quite good, but I don't really know what to judge that against. Was that what was expected? Is that a good number of people?
So we're joined by Councillor Thompson, so thank you very much, Councillor.
Yes. Sorry, you've got me tonight rather than the officers. So I will do my best to answer questions where I can. Yes, they were. A lot of the schemes were oversubscribed, and in fact, had we got extra money, we would have, been able to train even more people. So we've got some more UK Shared Prosperity funding for the forthcoming year. I know that applications to both the Rural Fund and the UK Fund have now closed, and they are heavily oversubscribed. But yeah, we were very pleased with the take up, actually. So yeah, it proved that we needed to run these courses, and it's just a great shame that we don't have an ongoing financial stream that we can continue with courses such as these.
Councillor Bolton.
On the same subject, I just wondered whether there was any early indication that there'll be more grant funding in Rural Prosperity Fund, whether you'd heard anything more on its way, and also second to that, whether we're able to support rural primary schools in particular with things like solar panels and that sort of thing.
Right, well, on the funding, yes, we've got an extra, we've been awarded 327,000 for this year going forward for the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and 223,500 for the Rural Fund. As I say, they've both closed, and we are heavily oversubscribed with
So you don't know about another?
No,
Okay.
and in fact we were very surprised that we got this, actually. So yeah, no idea about that. Schools, well, that's a difficult one, because of course school management is the responsibility of the county, and it always seems like a huge missed opportunity to me that they haven't been slapping solar PVs on all their school buildings, because they do tend to have very large roofs. But I don't understand how the funding is for that. And I suspect, no, we couldn't do that. I think it would have to come from the county. Yeah, I don't think it could come from that.
Question for myself. At the bottom of that page, it says that the team secured employment and skills plans for local people for the following developments. What scheme or what mechanism by which were the council able to sort of get those businesses to offer those roles? If you're able to answer that.
Yeah, it's on the other page. Yeah, I think it's just as set out in the paper. I don't have an absolute answer to that, but I can find out if you like. But basically, we've obviously been able to get people in employment. I mean, one of the things we did do, we worked with the job centre, and we did some of the digital skills training through them, and they were able to push people forward for positions, and maybe that might have led to some of the jobs that you see there, or organisations.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I know that from the council point of view, there are social responsibility sort of opportunities we have when we're contracting ourselves directly, but I didn't know if this was through that or whether there was another mechanism by which we, sort of encouraged employers to do this type of work. Thank you.
I think it's, at times that's part of a planning permission, isn't it? On the bigger projects to have a skills program, or it's negotiated at the time. So
I mean, just not from the scheme that we were running, but certainly when the leisure centre was being built, there was a skills programme that, and I think they, off the top of my head, they had about 80 to 90 trainees there that kept coming through their skills programme. So yes, it does happen, but not, these are very specific courses that we ran, and the upshot was from there. That's something different. But
thank you. Are there any further questions on that particular paper in September? Yeah, we then moved on to the housing repairs maintenance contract, which I know from the fact that there's been a change of approach with this anyway. So, but are there any questions around that one that was through the information that's presented there? No. So we move on to November, and we have the disabled facility grants policy review. Any questions about what we'd reviewed at that particular meeting? And within that same meeting, we had the housing revenue and the business plan and budget options. There wasn't a great deal recorded there. And then I think our final meeting was the 11th of February. Again, there was the Shared Prosperity Fund, which Councillor Thompson was just referring to in terms of another option coming through now. And then the housing repairs and maintenance policies. Sorry, Councillor.
Question on February.
Yep.
Just regarding item 1, the equitable distribution of funding across wards. Can I just ask whether that's done on a year-by-year basis, or you look at the history of which wards have received funding in the past, and that is factored into the decision as well?
Well, the scheme started 3 years ago, and to start with, like all these government funded schemes, communities are quite slow to take it up, so we had to go with the projects that came forward pretty much in the first year. And obviously, as it built momentum, then we were able to be a little more specific and have sort of clear priorities about where we wanted the money to go. At the report that we saw in February, we did outline sort of in monetary terms how much had been spent in each area, and certainly going forward this year we are tending to I mean I'm not involved in the choosing of the projects and giving the go-ahead. That's all done by officers, but certainly we are looking at new organisations coming forward with bids, and we are sort of we're giving an added priority to those rather than people who've had prosperity funding in the past. That doesn't mean to say that nobody who has applied before won't get anything, but we are sort of looking so that other people get a chance to have a bite of the cherry, I suppose.
Perhaps you can only do that on a sort of organisation by organisation basis. You can't do that in terms of wards or regions of the city.
Not really, no. It's kind of organisations. I believe.
Mr. Murphy. Sorry.
Yes, another February question, just on the housing repairs and maintenance policy, item 2. We had this concern around when we had the debate around the appeals process for recharge policy, and we have the comment there that has been added specifically. I know it's early days. Do we have any experience of whether that is being used? How? Yeah, and because we saw it as a key bit of the process, and what's happening basically.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The policy hasn't been implemented yet. It's going to be considered by Cabinet Committee Housing this July meeting, but we've included your recommendation in that policy to be considered then.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments that we'd like to raise with Cabinet members? No? Great, thanks very much. Okay. So that brings us then on to item 9. And this is the committee's current work programme. Just like to, before we move on to that, indicate that at the scrutiny meeting, or subsequent scrutiny meeting, there has been a meeting of the chairs of committees, and one of the things that we're looking at is that there's availability of resource to undertake some task and finish groups conducted through the scrutiny and the economy housing policy group and the health and environment policy group. So what I'd like to do is not now, but ask if members have any areas of topics that they'd like to raise with that. There is a further meeting of the chairs sometime in August, which will actually discuss then the topics that will go forward in terms of task and finish groups. So that will be an element. Once those agreed, there'll be a potential for some additional work to be commissioned through this policy group in the September meeting. But in advance of that, we have the current agenda, where next meeting is the 16th of September. And we have a paper coming forward on preventing homelessness and rough sleeping. We're also then looking at, from economy point of view, the tourism strategy and the evidence base that is going to support that. We then have a meeting on the 25th of November. And currently we are looking at the local visitor economy partnership with the structure, role and priorities. And our final meeting of the year, this calendar year, or this council year, on the 24th of February 2026. We then are actually looking at some reviews of both the markets policy and the festival and events policy. So these are things that we've asked to come back, or have been sort of scheduled to come back. So in terms of Councillor Morris, it is an opportunity for us to actually review and actually sort of comment on the actual implementation of a policy that went through this committee about a year ago. So it's an opportunity for us to sort of do that reflection and getting some real information about how things have been implemented. So those are the remaining meetings of the council year. And I think, unless there's anything else from members at the committee at this stage, all it is for me is to thank the cabinet members and Simon as the remaining officer and Nancy for conducting the meeting, and at 25 to 8 bring the meeting to a close. So thank you all very much. Thank you.